Let's talk now, though, to Mary Dejevsky, columnist at The Independent, because an incredible story yesterday unfolded yesterday afternoon. I spoke to Peter Cardwell about it yesterday on his show, just as soon as I could, because Evan Gershkovich, who works for the Wall Street Journal, a colleague of ours right here in News UK, in the building, was freed yesterday, along with 24 people who were returned to the West in what is being described as the biggest prisoner exchange since the Cold War. There's a picture on the front page of the Times this morning of Evan with Alsu Kurmasheva and Paul Whelan in Turkey. They turned up in Ankara, where they then boarded a plane taking them back to the US of A, and I believe they've now touched down in America, and we hope to show you pictures of that as well shortly. Let's talk to Mary about what happened. Mary, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
This appears to be quite an extraordinary deal that involved the US government, the German government, an awful lot of hard work by some executives here at News Corp, the US company of which News UK is a part. But very, very happy for Evan Gershkovich. 491 days being held without really any evidence whatsoever. A sort of sham trial in which he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. A very happy day.
Well, obviously, it is a very, very happy day. It's also completely extraordinary. I mean, as things unfolded yesterday, it was really exciting from the first sort of indications that something was afoot to actually watching this happening through the day. But I think, you know, that there's already a certain amount of misgiving being expressed and saying, well, you know, this has really given Russia a carte blanche, essentially, to take people hostage in the future. And obviously, you know, that is a downside of these sort of exchanges.
Yes, I mean, I suppose there's always going to be the risk that you run, that if you give in to, you know, those people who take hostages in order to, you know, get the hostages back, they may learn the lesson that they should do it again.
Absolutely, but it's a very, very narrow judgment. You know, in so many people being involved in this exchange, which I think maybe is not just the biggest prisoner exchange since the Cold War. It may be the biggest exchange of this sort ever.
Yes.
Because 24 people involved, at least 6, I think maybe 7 countries involved in the negotiations. But each one of those countries involved and their diplomats will have had to make the call as to whether, in a way, that the deal that they were doing was worth it from their perspective. And Russia will have made the same. You know, Russia was trying to strike a very, very hard bargain in the people that it wanted back. And so, to an extent, you know, the West had a degree of leverage as well as Russia.
Yes, I think we've got a clip of Joe Biden on the prisoner swap.
And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's a relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time.
And could this be a sign as well, though, Mary? I know you said that, you know, it might give the Russians the idea that this is something they should do again. But does it also give a sign to the West that Vladimir Putin is a man who will negotiate?
Well, absolutely. This deal has, in some form or other, has been in the works at least since last autumn. Vladimir Putin went public on it very sort of distantly at a press conference at the end of last year. He then spoke again about it in his interview with Tucker Carlson in February. And at that point, it appeared that the Russian opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, was supposed to be one of the key elements in this exchange. And then, of course, he died suddenly in February. The exact circumstances of his death aren't clear. But that seems to have put the whole that seems to have been a gigantic setback, because of course if he was a key figure in this, suddenly he wasn't there to be exchanged. And it's interesting to me, and I think sets quite a precedent, that among those exchanged were not just Westerners, not just foreigners held in Russia, but essentially Russian dissidents and political prisoners. One of them, Orlov, is a dissident from way back, and there were other people who were imprisoned because they opposed the war in Ukraine, and it was interesting to me, not only that they were some of the people who the West was obviously asking for and bargaining for, but that Russia was prepared to let them go. And as you say, this seems to me to indicate that Putin and Russia are, as it were, in a negotiating mood. Now, I heard a different view of this yesterday when an American diplomat said, a former American diplomat said that he thought the deal was possible because it was kept in a completely separate silo, if you like, from any discussions about anything else, including the war in Ukraine. And he said that was an advantage, and therefore it had no knock-on effect on anything else. He may be right about that. That may have made the deal possible. But I'm not sure that he was completely right, because I think it sets and it gives an indication of maybe a slightly different atmosphere, that there is communication going on when the impression had been that Russia was being, that there were attempts in the West completely to isolate Russia. Clearly, there are communications. And if this improves the mood, if this suggests that a degree of flexibility is possible, then maybe we're looking at something that could affect other points of tension, and the central one of those is obviously the war in Ukraine.
Obviously. Mary, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Mary Dejevsky there, columnist at The Independent and specialist in Russian affairs. And for those of you who wonder about this story and how important it is, she's just said there that it could have ramifications for the war in Ukraine, it could have ramifications for talks with Putin, but it could also make you think, because we talked about this yesterday with Peter Cardwell briefly. You know, Evan Gershkovich is a colleague of ours. Imagine at your work if somebody that you knew was taken hostage and was locked away in a room for a year, maybe more, 491 days in Evan's case. He's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal office is in this building. Yes, the Wall Street Journal is a US paper, but it has a European edition. It has editions all over the world. And when you think about being locked up and when you think about hostages, I can tell you a story that I learned when I went to look at an exhibition which was run by a Jewish group about the Hamas hostages, the people taken in October the 7th, and how terrible it was for them to be hidden away from the world, to be put into a dark room, to be placed somewhere without any real sensory perception whatsoever, in a dark place. And they said to me, if you want to know what that's like, here's what you do. You close your eyes and you count to 60. And that will mean you've been there for a minute. And then continue to do that for another 4 minutes until you've been there for 5 minutes. And when you've done that, think about how many times you'd have to count to get to an hour. And then think about how many times you'd have to count to get to a day. And then think about how many times you'd have to count to get to a week. And so on, until you find out that in Evan Gershovich's case, you've been there 491 days in a dark room, on your own, without any company, with some papers. He was able to write things down. But just imagine that, 491 days in isolation, never knowing if you might ever see your family again. And that is why it's such an important story. And that is why it's such a celebratory and joyous story for everybody here at News Today.